day I left for agriculture college, my mother, she showed me our farm financials, and we hadn't made money in over 5 years. And she said to me, if you don't fix these numbers, I'm going to leave your father. So I went off to agriculture college, the same as you guys, to save the family farm. And when I was at college, I wrote a work one-on-one with a university professor on how to write business plans to turn around agriculture businesses. And I did a 200-page business plan that I spent 8 months putting together, and I gave it to my father, and he looked at it and he threw it straight in the fire. And then after that, I wrote 18 business plans. Each one was completely different, and none of them got read. And by my final year of college, I was getting really frustrated. And we had a huge fight that Christmas. And my Uncle Claude, he was like the ultimate good old boy. He stepped in and he says, you know, why don't we give the boy the field behind the farm? And so we did. What I did was I got the field behind the barn to try out my ideas. And if they worked, we were going to try them on the rest of the farm. If they didn't work, no big loss. So we did that. In mid-August, my Uncle Claude came and looked at what I was doing, and he was really impressed. And I know you were thinking I was growing pot. That's not me. That's my cousin Jimmy on the third concession line. The thing is that it was a bit complicated what I was doing, so I won't get into it. But the thing is, my Uncle Claude was so impressed. He came into the house and he slapped my dad on the back, and he says, your boy's going to make more money off an acre than you're going to make off the entire farm this year. And he just kidded his brother. He thought it was a big joke. And the thing is, my dad did not think it was a joke. And a couple of days later, my dad plowed down my crops. And nobody could understand why. And I spent 10 years trying to understand what would cause a man who was about to lose the farm and about to lose his family to plow down his son's crops. And that became an obsession of mine for about 10 years, researching. And that drives what I do today and what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. But before I go into it, I got to tell you the rest of the story. The thing is, my parents got in a big fight, and my mom says, don't you dare buy any more farming equipment until you sat down and wrote a business plan with your son. And my dad went to an auction sale, and he bought a manure spreader, and he came home with this manure spreader, and I guess you could say the shit hit the fan, and they got a divorce. And it's kind of a shitty story to tell, but it's kind of funny. And the thing is that my name's Andy Junkin, and I save family farms. And for the last 10 years, I've been turning the most shittiest situations across North America around, either dealing with the most dire farm succession or the most dire farm debt situations. And I usually come on to these farms after they've had 2 or 3 experts out to the farm telling them what to do. And I figured out about a decade ago that most of the farms I'm working with, they're actually smarter than I am. And the thing is, I never tell farmers what to do, but just simply focus on making things simplified and improving how everybody makes decisions together. Because you don't need an expert to tell you what to do. You know the answers to your problems. It's just that we got to get everybody being able to put their heads together. And, you know, to understand where I'm coming from, I'm going to go off in left field here. And the thing is that, you know, what's the biggest change we've had in technology over the last 40 years? Come on, guys. GPS, what did else you say? Machinery, what else we got? Computers, what else we got in the last 40 years? Cell phones. Okay, the thing is, we could go on, and you guys are all right. But the thing is, from my perspective, the biggest change in that changed the family dynamics in farming is the fact that we have fewer farmers dropping dead of heart attacks in their 50s than we did back in the 1950s. Modern health sciences is a game changer to the dynamics of the family farm. Now, I'm not talking about Viagra. I mean, that's a whole different presentation. But the thing is that on most family farms back in the 60s, when Dad was 60, his hips were sore and couldn't wait to retire. Nowadays, what's Dad doing when he's 60? He gets a hip replacement and he's farming into his 80s or 90s. And I think that's fantastic. If you want to farm to the day you die, I'm all about making that happen. The problem is we have a lot of 75-year-olds dictating to their 55-year-olds every day what to do. And that's on some operations. On the majority of operations, you have 4 or 5 business partners because you have 2 or 3 generations farming together, and you probably have 2 or 3 siblings farming together, or 2 or 3 cousins, and everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And you get nowhere fast. And the thing is, we got, instead of 1 dictator on the farm, we got too many dictators, right? We got too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And the problem is, we haven't thought about that how this is going to impact us going into the next farm crisis, is that back in the 80s farm crisis, one guy was making all the decisions because he owned everything. It was smaller family farms. And a guy could get bad news from the bank, and he could, think about that for the week. Just plow, not talk to anybody. And then when it's raining, driving into town, see several people, make several decisions, turn around the farm. Nowadays, we got 4 or 5 business partners that can't sit down and make simple decisions, let alone figure out how to cut your cost of production by 25%. And as a result, the crisis that we're about to have in agriculture is not caused by the weather, not going to be caused by the markets, not going to be caused by these tariffs. Is the fact that we can't sit down and make decisions together to react to the times. And that's going to kill our farms. And what I'm saying to you is that we got to stop being tough on one another and start being able to sit down and make tough decisions together in order to bulletproof your farm against anything. So I got 3 simple ideas that you can practically go home tonight and actually apply to change around your farm's business culture. And so, first of all, before we get into things much further, okay, who's the cash croppers in this room? Okay, so I'm going to pick on some cash croppers just for my personal opinion about these tariffs that we have is that most of us haven't really thought through the implications of these tariffs. Because you got the farmers that grew corn, soybeans in 2018, there's going to be a lot, not everybody, but a lot of guys that grow all corn next year. And that's going to crash the corn market. I think we're going to have a ripple effect that we haven't really thought through and how it's going to impact our agriculture economy. And the times that we're entering is a lot different over the next 5 years than the last 5 years. I don't think these tariffs are going to be going away anytime soon. So my question to you is, what do you think the price of corn is going to be next year?
Probably lower than it is now.
Okay, but what do you think it's going to be next is almost November. Next November in 2019, what do you think the price of corn is going to be at?
I don't know, maybe 250,
250? What do you think it's going to be at?
I don't know, like 270 probably.
270? What do you think it's going to, anybody else? Any cash croppers here? $2? We don't really know. But the thing is, what happens if it does get down to $2? How many guys that know cash croppers can survive at that price, right? You just can't, right? And I think the thing is, we got to think through our worst case scenarios that we could be encountering. And the thing is, I come from a farm where our cost of production for 5 years was $1.20, and we were averaging 83 cents. Well, let me tell you, that doesn't help a marriage. And the thing is that I remember going to farm protest rallies, and I actually remember throwing eggs at politicians, which was kind of fun. But the thing is, we were blaming these politicians for our faults. And the thing is that my dad thought the society owed us a debt to raise our prices up to $1.20 so we could break even. And, it took me quite a few years to figure out nobody cares if we farm or not. And that's a harsh lesson to learn. For a while, I thought as a teenager that the solution was to raise the demand for beef. And so, God, I swear to God, this actually happened. I went door to door like a Jehovah's Witness, knocking all the vegetarians' doors in my hometown, trying to convert them to eat beef. And that happened, but it didn't do anything to change the markets. And the thing is, when I went to agriculture college, I realized that we had to drop our cost of production from $1.20 down to 83 cents. And that seemed impossible, but I realized that nobody cared if we survived as a farm or not. We had to figure out a way to do that. And here's the key thing for you guys, is the problem I made with my father is I went home and I told him what to do. I had these 18 business plans. And they were well researched, well thought through. But believe it or not, no farmer likes to be told what to do. And the mistake I made is instead of what, I should have focused in on why. The first thing you got to do when you go home is you got to get your family unified on a common goal. And you got to make it so simple of an idea and so obvious that everybody gets behind it. And for everybody in this room, that goal is going to be different. But I would suggest you just keep it to simple one number. For you back there, if you're a cash cropper, I'd write $2 on the side of the barn. And $2 seems impossible. But the thing is, what happens if corn does actually get down to that price, you'll be at least breaking even. And every dime above that, you'll be making profit. And if you guys drive your cost of production down to that number and the markets go back up to $7 corn, then you're only making more money, right? The thing is that it seemed impossible when JFK said, we're going to put a man on the moon in 10 years' time. That seemed impossible. Half the technology hadn't even been developed. But the man got shot, he was dead, and the goal got achieved. Because one simple goal got thousands of people unified. And what's happened with NASA ever since? They have a 3-paragraph mission statement, and it sits in somebody's filing cabinet nobody ever reads. And they've done relatively little ever since. Because their mission statement was so complex. And I would suggest to you guys that you get a number on the side of the door. You know, the thing is that I work with a lot of farms. I mean, how many guys are here at dairy? Right? A lot of guys. And, you know, I've written this on a lot of farms. And, you know, you put this in the milk house door. You know, first of all, you get in trouble by the partners. Because this is a $13 a hundredweight as a target goal. In Michigan, that's what they've been getting paid for the last couple of years. And a lot of dairymen that I work with, they're at $17. And that seems like an impossible goal to drive your cost of production. But you put that number on the door, and I've seen it change completely change operations. A lot of farms I work with, they go from $17 down to $14 within the course of a year and a half. And the reason why, like I'll give you an example. I had a 600 cow dairy, and the son, he wanted to work 4 hours a day. He wanted to go breed cows, do some herd health, and be back in the house. They had a hired man. The hired man had cancer. His wife had cancer, I should say. So he was MIA for the months that she was dying. And the son, his premise was, well, we should just hire another employee. I'm not going to change my lifestyle. And the thing is, the uncle got really frustrated. And the uncle was working 12-hour days as is. And so all of a sudden he had to feed the calves and do this employee's work. And was working 15-hour days. We put $13 on the barn door. And the son quickly figured out that their cost of production was actually $19. And the son quickly figured out that if he wanted the lifestyle he had, and he wanted to be a dairyman, he had to step up and do the work. And so now, today, he's the first one in the barn and the last one to leave. It changed his behavior. Why?
One number on the side of the shed.
I had a farm, and there was a guy, a father with John Deere underwear. I don't know if you have any of those neighbors where they're all John Deere, right? I'm not talking about your parents, of course, right? But the thing is that he was obsessed with John Deere, and the thing is he loved his machinery. They were his pets, I guess you'd say. The thing is, they went to all no-till, and he had a full line of conventional tillage equipment, and they've been doing no-till for several years and liked it. And the thing is that they've been doing GPS for 10 years. They had the data, but they need to make the switch to get a variable rate fertilizer drill and a variable rate seed drill. And the thing is, they didn't have the money for it. They were in tight financial times. And, you know, one number on, they were cash coppers, and we had them set, it was 275, I think, was their goal. And that number on their shop door, 6 weeks later, Dad came to the family meetings. And he says, you know what? Let's flip all that machinery we're not using, and let's put that down as payment for these drills. And the next year, they dropped their cost of production for the fertilizer by 20%. Why?
One number on the side of the shed.
I had 3 brothers. And the one it was 2013, and they realized all of a sudden that they were losing $200 an acre at $7 corn. It was a cluster situation. And the thing is that the bank told them they had to get their cost of production down to $3.20 within a year, or else they're going to take the farm. The bank did not expect them to actually make those changes. And we put $3.20 on the side of the brand new shop. And the thing is that later that night, they got in a fight, and they were blaming who was to blame. They were basically crying over spilt milk. And then the one brother grabbed the other brother by the shirt, was about to deck him. Swear to God, this happened. And his sister-in-law, who he hated, yelled out across the shop, "What does this have to do with $3.20 corn?" And that just changed everything. They realized that from that second, it didn't matter what the hell happened in the past. All that mattered for that farm was getting their cost of production down to $3.20. And every time they made a decision, they always asked the question, what does this have to do with $3.20 corn? And all the BS between brothers went out the window. One brother, they had bought the farm next door. It had a $750,000 house with a pool on it. They made a decision to sell that farm, and the brother had to move into the hired man shack. That was, pretty humiliating, but he did it. Why?
One number on the side of the shed.
You get everybody on your farm unified by a tough goal, and you'll get results within a year. That farm that I just spoke to you about, it took them 2 years to get down to 320 corn. And now they're at 225 corn. And they're growing when all the neighbors are going broke. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is setting... the problem we have is the way we problem solve. I'm sorry, I got a stone in my shoe. As farmers, we have a common sense, no matter what. This has been bothering me for the last 20 minutes. As farmers, we have a common sense to sit down and take the stone out of our shoe. I had a cousin who was a neighbor, because I'm from one of those towns. The problem was he was cousin a couple different ways, that's which is concerning. Anyways, he had a stone in his shoe, and he got so fat when he was 400 pounds, and he was in the late 70s. He's one of those bachelors that live in a rundown shack. And he got a stone in his shoe, and it rubbed him the wrong way. He didn't want to admit to anybody he couldn't take a stone out of his shoe because he was sleeping with his boots on. So he let it go for a while, and he started hobbling around. And a couple months later, he was just flat out on his back, and the house couldn't leave the house. He was lame. And finally he called the doctor, and the doctor looked at it and tore off his shoe by cutting it. And he says, "We're going to have to cut off your leg because you got gangrene setting in your leg." He says, "Forget that." And then 2 days later, he was dead. Why? Because of a stone rubbing around in your shoe. And the thing is, in farming, we have the common sense normally to sit down for a minute and take a stone out of your shoe, or else you'll go lame and that scenario will happen. But how many times do you see a farming partnership where you got 2 or 3 partners and something simple like a brother sleeping in or other problems you have working together, all of a sudden rubs you the wrong way, until it starts to bother you. And then you get 5 or 6 stones in your shoe. And then one day somebody snaps and you split the partnership up. And that's all fine and dandy when it's 2013, you got $7 corn. But then you hit $7 beans and you lose your economies of scale, and both brothers will be out of business in 5 years' time. All because they didn't have the common sense to sit down and solve their problems. And the thing is, how many times you see on any farm where there's got 2 or 3 partners and there's production problems because they can't sit down. It's a white elephant in the room. You don't want it to. You see problems with what your brother's doing, but you don't want to address that issue because of the political repercussions. And so it rubs you the wrong way, And basically you have 10 or 12 production problems in your farm that you don't address because of the politics of working within a family. And suddenly you got gangrene sitting in your foot. And it's fine dandy when it's $7 corn, but when it's $7 beans, those inefficiencies really start to show up. And the simple solution to all of this is to sit down once a week and take out 1 stone out of your shoe each week. And with the farms I work with, the simple policy is everybody's got to show up to the table with one good idea as to how to improve farm profit by $3,000 without spending $1,000. And if you don't show up with your homework done, you get called on it, and you have to pull out $10 out of your wallet, and you have to burn it. And I guarantee you, after your grandpa or your Uncle Fred didn't show up to show up with the idea researched, that idea that they had in the shower on Tuesday night or Wednesday afternoon when they're plowing, they'll come to the table next week with it. And what we do is generally, if you have 3 partners sit down, 2 out of 3 ideas are good ideas. And over the course of a year, that's 100 improvements to your operation. And that's generally between $300,000 to $500,000 in new found efficiencies. It's easy to come up with these ideas. There's money slipping between the cracks on every family farm. Of that, just little ideas really add up. More importantly, what I suggest is you don't leave that room until you found one way to simply improve how you guys work together and how you guys manage the farm together. And if you can make 50 improvements over the course of a year, it makes a huge difference to the culture of that farm. The thing is, if you guys problem solve, instead of talking about problems, when you go home to farm with your family, the first question should be, how are we actually going to problem solve? And that's the first problem you should fix. Problem solve how you problem solve, and the problems will quickly go away. And the third and final thing I want to talk to you about is pride. The fact is, we've got to get tough on pride. And the thing is that on most family farms, miscommunication and egos affects the farm's bottom line more than the markets and weather altogether. And with the Mo family, my dad plowed down my crops for no reason at all, simply because of pride. He was focused on short-term gratification, a power struggle. And, in the end, he didn't have a farm to be proud of. Everything's gone. I'm standing 1,000 miles away from you because our farm is gone. All because of pride. And the thing is that I thought this was just isolated to my family operation. But it's there at subtle levels on every family farm. And this is, as you go home to farm with your family, this is going to be the biggest challenge you guys have. The thing is, when young lads go home from agriculture college, you got 1,001 ideas as to how to improve the operation. And believe me, most families, your parents would embrace the ideas you first suggest. They'll go down to the coffee shop and brag about it. And they'll sponsor your dreams. But at some point in time, and believe me, if you guys make a mistake, your dad will remind you 15 years down the road. Don't worry about that. But the thing is, at some point in time, suggestions you have for change are going to be seen as a criticism of past management decisions. And your parents built the farming to give to you on a silver platter. It may not be perfect, but it's there because some good decisions were made. And the problem is, it's not what you say, but how you say it. And the problem is often what you say is meant with good intentions, but it's not understood that way. And so the key thing is, and then vice versa. Soon the parents start shutting down your ideas for change, and soon it just becomes irrational. And then vice versa, when your parents suggest ideas, when you enter your 30s and 40s, you start shutting down those ideas because you feel rejected by the ideas that you suggested. And soon, decision making on family farms becomes emotional instead of rational. And when that happens, you both have dysfunctional families and dysfunctional family businesses. And that's what causes farmers to go bankrupt. I was on a farm in Wisconsin there earlier this year in January, and it was a father and daughter situation. And every farm I walk onto, I always know, as a mediator, I know it's common practice where everybody's focusing on being right. And as a result, the situation on that farm ain't right. It's a fight for power and control. And when I walked onto this farm, the daughter, she was screaming. We were standing in the milk house. And the daughter, she was standing there, and she was yelling at her dad at full speed. And the thing is, I could see her dad was thinking. And I stopped the daughter halfway through what she was saying. And I said to him, "What did your daughter just say?" And he couldn't repeat back to me what she was saying. I said, "You were thinking about your reply instead of actually listening to what your daughter was saying, weren't you?" And I caught him flat-footed. And then the daughter went off the handle. "See, I told you that this has happened." I said, "You're just as equally as guilty as he is. You both are focusing on being right instead of things being not, and as a result, things are quite wrong in this operation." And the thing is that I knew I had 30 seconds to change their mindsets altogether, or else they weren't going to be farming together in 30 days. And so I had to say something profound. And if you guys are going to be offended, just cover your ears right now. Okay? And I said to the father, I said, "You have a bank barn over there. Have you ever thrown the rope over the barn beam to hang yourself?" And he looked at me, just like you guys look at me now. And I said, "We talk about farm suicides these days. When you throw a rope over a barn beam, and you make the decision to jump, that is a definite decision. And you're saying to the world, there is no other way to solve this problem but what I'm doing. And for each decision, there is multiple options." And what we haven't thought about with these farm suicides is, there's many reasons to cause many different farm suicides, but with the majority of cases that I've seen, what's led to that moment, what's led to that decision, is 10 years of the partners of the farm all being definite in their decisions and saying, it's my way or the highway. And everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, and a lot of dysfunctional decisions are made. And it leads to farms that are economically unviable and families that are just plain dysfunctional. And the spin-offs of this is mental health and farms being in financial peril. But it all comes down to the fact that everybody's insisting on having their own way and not considering what the other person's thinking. And the simple solution to solving this one problem is on the tip of your finger. It's looking at things 5 different ways. And whenever you get in a fight with your partners about a decision, the 2 or 3 of you guys should start looking at things instead of one way, in each other's way. You sit down and look at what are the 5 different options. And it's easy to come up with 3 options, but it probably takes some brainstorming to come up with the last 2. And I know for that farm in Wisconsin, they dropped their cost production significantly because they started looking at the other 2 options that started brainstorming were actually more viable most of the time. And they also improved their relationship dramatically. They actually get along really good because they looked at things 5 different ways. And then they sat down and weighed the pros and cons of those different options after they flushed them out. And then they made joint decisions together. And that got rid of the whole contest that they had going on between the two of them. And if you want to change the dynamics of your farm, you just simply set a policy that we have to look at things 5 different ways. And that you guys got to get rid of the pride and focus on what matters. Now, before I go close, I'm getting a lot of calls from farmers that are really desperate. And they're calling me after the auctioneer's already been called. And I take pride in being able to turn around the most dire situations. But the sooner I can get working with a family, the better, the more options we have. And I'm going to tell you a story about my Uncle Gerald. Not out of disrespect to my Uncle Gerald, but out of respect to your family and hopefully the fact that you can be farming 10 years down the road. But the thing is, my Uncle Gerald, he was the best farmer in our county. And he had 5 men working for him. And they say he did the work of 5 men himself. He got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and worked until 10 o'clock every night and never stopped to eat. He was go, go, go. And the thing is, they said he was a genius. And there's nobody could feed cattle like Gerald Junkin. And the thing is that my first memories, I was 8 years old at the time of 1983, and I got sunstroke that day. And I remember the stress of his auction. And essentially on a day that was a really good haying day, when he should have been haying himself, he was having to sell all his haying equipment in order to make bank payments. And my mother was cursing my uncle and saying he did too little, too late. And the thing is, he didn't apply the principles I just spoke to you about right now. My Uncle Gerald thought the markets would go back up. And they never did in time. He had a few stones in the shoe that he didn't address. And he just thought he was smarter than the average cat, which he was. And he ignored them. And they got gangrenous on him. And my Uncle Gerald was proud. And he made some stupid decisions out of pride. And, it's hard to imagine. My Uncle Gerald had been through a lot of tough times before. And it just hit him like a frying pan when he realized that he was actually underwater in 1983. And the thing is that we talk about risk in agriculture, but it's we talk about it as if we're ready to take risk. And it's pretty hard for a farmer when you go out and feed cattle every day. And when being a farmer is the core of who you are. It's pretty hard to imagine that feedlot or that barn being empty. But it was an impossible thought for my Uncle Gerald. But it became too quick a reality for him. Because he didn't react to the circumstances quick enough. And I can't shake my Uncle Gerald. And I can't go back in 1978 and say, look, man, you got to start. You can't farm in 1981 the same as you did in 1976. You got to adjust for the economics of the times. But I can tell you this about what the implications of risk are. My Uncle Gerald in 1984 lost a farm. That's not the big deal. My Uncle Gerald got divorced. He lost contact with his kids. His brothers, who were extremely tight, disowned him for ruining the family name. The community all turned their back on him, even though he was one of the most respected guys in the 70s. But that's not the worst of it. My Uncle Gerald worked from 5 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night for 50 years. He was, I think, in his 60s when he went bankrupt. 10 years later, he was homeless. And the thing was, they found his body, and we had to use dental records to identify it because his body was so hurt. And the thing is, when we talk about risk, we don't really, and we talk about losing everything and being willing to lose everything. We don't really think through what that means. And I can't encourage you enough to take the situation we're about to go into seriously. Because just because you're a successful farmer 5 years ago doesn't mean you're going to be successful 5 years from now. And we got to take the situation these tariffs are not going away. And folks say that I'm a doomsdayer. I think you can understand I come by that honestly. But the thing is that every generation, 50% of family farms fail. That's statistical facts going back to the pioneer days. But in the next 5 years, we got things coming down the pipeline. We could lose the whole half of our generation within 5 years. Real easy. And the thing is, you got to consider yourself an underdog. Just because you're successful 5 years from now, take the situation seriously. And everybody says, oh, it's all going to be economies of scale. Well, you give me a $40 million farm where everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And you give me a $5 million farm that applies these principles I just spoke to you about. And they're able to sit down and make good decisions together. And they're able to pull in the same direction. And day to day, they're able to operate more efficiently because they're able to work well together. Who's going to be able to react to the times? Who's going to be able to drive their cost of production down? More importantly, whose family Christmas do you want to be at? What farm do you actually want to be on for the next 40 years? Anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making is going to dramatically improve the profitability of your farm. Anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making is going to dramatically eliminate all that BS working with family, and farming actually becomes fun again. And if you go home and you apply these principles and you drive down your cost of production and the markets go back up, what are you lost? You're just making more money. But if you don't go home and apply these principles, you could lose everything. And, the thing is, what I want you to do is actually, how many presentations have you heard where you said, hey, that was a good speaker, and then 6 months later, nothing has changed on your farm? And the question is this really a time where you can do nothing? And so on the drive home to your farm, whether it's tonight or tomorrow, I want you on the drive home to get on the phone with your partners and come up with one simple number. It's going to be different for every farm. If you're a dairy farm, it could be $13 a hundredweight. If you're a cash crop farm, it could be $2. It could be $2.75. It doesn't matter what that number is. The thing is, you guys have to identify a realistic goal that you guys think you can pull off. It might be audacious, but you can do it. And then when you get home, you park that truck in front of the shop, and you go into the shop, and you get the ugliest freaking spray paint you can find, and you put it on the freaking door, okay, of the shop. And your partners give you trouble. You say to them, look, if we drive our cost of production down and the markets go up, we can afford a new door. If we don't make changes today and the markets even go close to these numbers, we're going to be bleeding cash, and we're not going to own this door in 10 years' time. Now, I believe in the power of prayer, but I think this is not just the time for prayer, it's the time for action. So I want to leave you with this thought about a prayer. It's the Serenity Prayer. It's the prayer used by Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I'm not saying you have to be an alcoholic to farm, but the thing is, the Serenity Prayer goes like this. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can't change these Chinese tariffs. We can't change the market. We can't change the weather. But we are in control of our decisions. And unfortunately, when we're in a farming partnerships these days, we are not in control of our decisions. Over half the decisions are just not being made because of this butting of heads. And what I'm saying to you is, we got to stop being tough on one another. We got to be able to sit down and make tough decisions together, and to be able to bulletproof your farm against anything. Tough times never last. Tough farm families do. Thanks very much. Really appreciate that.
Questions? How many of you are planning, just so he knows, how many of you are planning to return to the family farm?
Cool. Very cool. I think the key thing is I own farmsuccession.com, and I do a lot of succession planning. And the key thing is that until you and your partners are able to sit down and squeeze out 10% extra profit out of the operation in a year, you're not ready to talk about succession planning. Because too often I walk into family farms and they're sitting down at the kitchen table and make decisions together. And I heard one 40-year-old guy, he says, like, we're sitting at the same kitchen table where I used to get hit in the back of the head with a wooden spoon. And my dad still wants to do that, right? And the thing is that the families have that power dynamics going on. And the first thing you got to get rid of is those power dynamics and being able to sit down and make decisions together. And if you can do that, succession plan is easy. It can be done in an afternoon. But it won't happen until you are able to make decisions together as a family. So, yeah.
What's the biggest mistake young people make when they go home? Is it that throwing too many changes out at one time, Andy? Is that the biggest change?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you got to do when you go home is change how you deal with change, right? And I'm telling you that from personal experience and also from the last 10 years of farms. I've dealt with most dysfunctional situations. And the thing is that if you go home and start suggesting ideas, like for the first 6 months you get home, you get some political grace where they encourage you to shoot your ideas out. And instead of you talking about buying a combine or building a new barn, the first thing you got to say is, okay, Mom and Dad, we got to sit down and have family meetings every Monday. And what you want to do is you want to change the dynamics of your family where your parents feel comfortable discussing ideas with you and where there's not that power struggle going on. And if that happens, all those ideas you have, what you got to do is you got to make sure that your mom and dad and your brothers or whoever you're farming with, they're coming to the table with ideas just the same as you are, at the same rate. And if you listen to their ideas, when you have a good idea, they'll listen to yours. But you got to make sure that dynamics happens. And there's quite a few of you guys that are going home to farms where grandpa and how many guys are farming with grandpa still or their uncles, right? You got to make sure. I can't encourage you enough that that's the first play you should make. Is changing how the partners make decisions together, or else it will quickly become a pissing contest. Okay. Don't you guys all talk at once? I mean,
They're a pretty rowdy bunch.
yeah, yeah.
But I think that it's not just in farm families, but I think it's a thing it's a part of society today. We all want to be right. Sometimes a team mentality, the goal should be, let's get it right. Let's get the right answer. I don't care if it's a marriage or whatever, 50% of all marriages. Andy said 50% of farm families per generation don't make it. Well, 50% of all marriages don't make it. Why? It's the same thing. If you and your spouse just want to be right, you're going to have problems. If we want to get it right, sometimes you have to say to yourself, oh, I'm wrong in this scenario. I had an idea. It was the wrong idea. It didn't work out. But it's hard to do that, isn't it? It's hard to admit when we're wrong.
That is going to be, that what he hit on is going to be the biggest challenge. About 30 miles from here, I was on dairy this year, and their cost of production is $19, and they had to make some serious cuts. And it was a 400 cow dairy. And the thing is that we sat down, we worked through the numbers, and there were 7 areas that the dairy could make some changes. So we sat down with the veterinarian, we sat down with their accountant, and we shot down. We threw out 7 different ideas, right? And the thing is that one idea was simply they were losing $400 a calf growing a calf, and it'd be cheaper for them to sell all their bull calves after 5 days. And unfortunately, that was what Dad's responsibility was. And he took it very personally. And so because it was such a tight economic circumstance, they only had a couple months to make some changes, or else the bank was going to pull the plug. And the thing is, so what we did was Dad shot down making any changes on that farm. Basically, each one of those 7 items, he refused to make changes of, because he seen it as criticism of what he was doing. And the bank pulled the plug on him. The first challenge you got to get is you got to get a culture where it's okay to be wrong. You know, we have Donald Trump as president right now, and there's nothing wrong with him, okay? But we all know how he operates from a management standpoint, right? What happens is basically you have 10 people coming in, and you have 5 people per team, and then they have a competition between the 2 teams, and then one team flies off and drinks champagne and eats caviar. Another team, they get stuck in the boardroom, and somebody has to be fired every week. And how many family farms you look at over 30 years, somebody's been fired every 5 years. And it's because of the culture of having to be right. And what you got to do, there's a guy from Iowa, his name was Edward Deming, and he was an Iowa farm boy, and he went into Ford back in the 40s, and Ford wanted to fire somebody. They kept on having these Model T Fords that were leaving the factory and breaking down the parking lot. And they wanted to fire whoever was responsible for all these mistakes. And so they expected the automobile to be perfect. And Deming, he came from western Iowa, and he went in there and he said there's nobody to fire except for maybe the executive. The problem is you have an expectation that there's never going to be mistakes. And because of this culture, everybody's touching that car. There's got 1,000 people touching the car, and everybody is going to make a mistake every couple of weeks. And they don't want to be fired because there's a lineup of people out the door and down the street wanting to work here. So they sweep their mistakes under the rug or shift blame to somebody else. And within the family business, I've been on so many family farms where, I'll give you an example. I had a farm where I got called out, and the dad already called the auctioneer. And this is one of my first clients 10 years ago. And there's 3 brothers. They were Dutch, and they were really intense. They were they were button heads. And I showed up the one day that the brother had just got back from rehab. And basically, they always laid blame for all their mistakes on this guy. And he just couldn't take that stress. And so we sat down, and I said, walked into the door, and they already had 2 meat eaters out there. The last lady, she lasted 20 minutes until one brother threw a punch, and she was kicked off the farm. And the thing is that I walked in there, and they expected me to get everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And I said, what's one thing you guys suck at? And they looked at me, and they were like, we're the best farm in the county. And you look at the DHI records, they were the top farm in the county. And the thing is, on every farm, there's mistakes made. And it took about, it took about 3 minutes for them to start open up. You guys all dairy farmers, right? So what I did was with them was one guy finally said, we have a preg rate issue. And the one brother that was responsible for breeding cows, he just about came across the table and punched his other brother again. And the thing is, I said, okay, let's solve that one problem. And the thing is, what are different problems that cause preg rate issues? You guys are dairy farmers. So don't you guys all speak at once? Who's the dairy farmer here? Okay. What's the preg rate issue? What causes preg rate issues?
Bad feed.
Feed? That's a good one. Okay. What's another thing that causes bad preg rate issues? Nutrition? What's another one that causes mistakes? Environment? Okay. What's another one? Okay, I think you guys get the idea. the thing is, what we did with them for about 10 minutes, we came through all the things that could be causing this problem. And the thing is that they thought, one guy thought it was the way the AI was being done, okay? Like the actual procedure. But it actually turned out that they had several problems. And they had a pregnancy rate of 14%. And for that 400 cow dairy in Ontario, Canada, where we get paid a lot of money for our milk, that was, the one brother, he said, well, this is a waste of my freaking time. I got manure to spread, I'm out of here. I said, okay, you just sit down and you figure out how much this is actually costing you, and then you can leave. And he sat down, and it turned out it was a $115,000 mistake when they factored in all the factors. And that got him to sit down. And the thing is, what we did was we identified an action plan of 5, I think it was 5 or 6 things, and each brother walked away with 2 things to do. Okay, the one brother, it turned out they had a stray voltage issue, and that they didn't ever expect that, but that actually was the key culprit. They had some nutrition issues, and they did have some feed issues. And the thing is, each guy had to walk away and fix those problems and come back. Well, I came back the next week, or it was about 2 weeks later, and I made the one brother, he had not gotten around to making the phone call about stray voltage. And he dismissed it and started making excuses. He says, well, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I said, okay, pull out $5 out of your wallet. And I made a Dutchman burn $5. Now, you want to see a farmer cry, making these guys burn $5. And I came back the next week, and he hadn't gotten around again, and I made him burn $10. And he knew, when he seen me coming down the lane, he knew that he was going to have to burn $20, and so he made the phone call before the meeting, and turned out that was a pregnancy issue. And the thing is that with that family, they went from blaming each other on the problems, and problems never getting solved, to actually being able to look at a problem factually without blaming anybody, and actually getting to the root issues as to what's causing the problems. And then assigning responsibility to each individual to walk away and do something, and they're responsible for doing it. Because quite often when we have family farms, we have great ideas, but the implementation is the problem. And the thing is, you can't have your mom always holding you accountable to getting things done, because it's like nagging you to do your homework. But quite often these power struggles happen in these family farms because people don't say what they're going to do and then do what they say. With that operation, that process of talking about preg issues changed a lot of their family dynamics, because they went from blaming each other to actually being able to problem solve. And they went from the auctioneer was already called, and they did a $2 million expansion the next year, because they went from hating each other, never talking to each other, to wanting to work together for 10 years. And they're just finishing off the 10 years, and now they have their own kids, and they're going their separate ways, but they have 10 times the capital because they've been able to work together for the last 10 years. And it's a very successful story. So the key thing, guys, is that if you can learn how to problem solve, how many guys here are going to be farming with their uncles? Or, the thing is, if you can get your families and to be able to work with not only your dad, you're not only going to be working with your dad, quite often you're going to be working with your uncles and your grandpas and your aunt that you really don't like. What you got to do is get families being able to sit down and problem solve and leave the emotions out of the room, and then it will quickly change the dynamics of how the family works outside the room. A lot of these problems that happen within farm families the root issue is because families can't sit down and make decisions together. And a lot of hurt emotions happen as a spin-off of that. Okay, so another question, then I've got to go. Well, thanks very much for your time, guys, and appreciate that. And yeah, if there's anything,
And you don't have questions?
You ever have a farm where you just can't make the numbers work?
depends how late they call, right? And that's the sad part. That's why I talked about my Uncle Gerald there, because I'm getting a lot of calls where guys know of me, and they wait 2 years, and I mean they're like 2 days before the bank's closing on them, and so in those situations it's pretty tough. The sooner that you can call and get a process in place, the better it is, right? So that depends. And also the other factor is how committed is everybody to actually following through on things. You know, quite often superficially you'll have somebody saying, we want to change, and then they themselves don't want to really change, right? That farm that I was talking about 30 miles away, he says, well, yeah, I want to change, but he really wasn't willing to change. And so, you know, those are the two biggest hurdles we have. But as far as turnarounds, I pull a lot of rabbits out of the hats and take a lot of pride in that. So, yeah. But it's always very frustrating to me that somebody calls me 2 days before when they, like I had a farm, they were Michigan Farm of the Year. The guy won the award for being Michigan Farm of the Year for the dairy. And he called me the day after the auctioneer was called. And this is the same month he got the award. His dad called and sold the cows. And he had actually talked to me at a conference, at the National Dairy Conference, 6 months before. And, you know, it's very frustrating for me in that circumstance that had I been on that farm 6 months before, we could have changed we could have turned that situation around easy. But by that time, things were too committed. His father simply was not willing to change or consider any changes. He had fixed on the idea of selling the dairy, and unfortunately, a week later, it sold. Actually, it was the day that I spoke in the state of Michigan was actually the day of his auction sale, and he was the one that organized that conference. So, and that just happened this year. So, the takeaway is, do this as soon as you can. Don't let it fester. All right.
Question that I have, Andy, is some of these, my guess is that a lot of us are they are returning to the farm. You know, they have this plan that we're gonna live in the same room we always lived in. Mom's gonna make breakfast like she always did. And Dad welcoming us home because that's one more person to help in chores. But how do we bring up the conversation of how are we doing financially? Because I'm guessing that Mom and Dad, you guys tell me if I'm right or wrong, but how many times does Mom and Dad come out with this person's coming home to the farm and they, here's the books, here's where we are.
Yeah,
How do you bring up that topic? I mean, that's pretty.
well, and the thing is, I quite often see guys that their parents are, here's the books, right? And when you're in college, they'll show you the books, but then 10 years later, it's a whole different story. The parents go from being open about the books to being closed. For sure, yeah.
It starts more open and actually becomes more closed.
Within a lot of families, yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. They might not like your wife. There's a lot of different factors. So, I mean, you asked a lot of different questions there. I would suggest that, you know, within your family, like one thing I talk about in this book here is the use of metrics. Like pregnancy, right? So what I would suggest to you when you go home is you get your family to identify 10 things you guys suck at. And every 90 days you change that. Okay, so like for this family here, they had a problem with pregnancy rate. And that was the first metric we dealt with. And over 90 days, we were able to fix that problem. Which was actually, the two brothers were complaining because they were only getting paid $20,000 a year by the farm. And the dad said, well, there's no room for more money. And they had families to feed. And obviously we were able to, from that money alone, it changed their whole lifestyle. But the thing is that if you can go home and you can identify 10 things you guys suck at, it will help your family multiple ways. One is that you are becoming aware of the financials of the farm. And too often farm families, I would say 98% of the farms that are out there right now, and the bankers would tell you this, simply use their financials for tax purposes. And if you can get your family working from metrics and just simply identify 10 problematic areas in your farm and then put them on a scoreboard in the milk house or put them in a scoreboard in the shop and say, here's 10 production problems. How are we going to fix these problems? And then each of these meetings, you guys constantly do research and figure out ways to fix these problems. What it does is it gets you exposed to actual farm financials and starting to make decisions instead of based on emotion, based on rational economics. And it also gets your family members open to the idea of change. And so that they don't see suggestions for change as personal criticism of what they've done in the past, but the fact that the group of you guys are working on just taking the bottom and continuously improving it. And the other thing is, it helps you, when you go home to farm with your family, your parents are farming for, your parents have a lot of wisdom. And you might not understand why the hell did dad do it that way, right? And that's because dad won't explain what he's doing. The problem with a lot of farmers, the more successful you are as a farmer, the tougher it is for you to let go of control and to teach management wisdom. So if you can have these meetings where you're looking at 10 numbers and you're questioning dad, why did you do it this way? He might actually explain to you why he does it that way, and it might make sense half the time. The other half of the time he says, you know what, you're right. We should be doing it this way different. And as a result, you have continuous improvement on your farm. So it's a good way for you guys to be able to get exposed to the numbers and also be able to weigh the pros and cons of ideas. I would suggest to all of you guys that don't go straight home to farm. Go away for a year and prove that go be a herdsman somewhere else. And you probably heard this a dozen times, but you probably haven't met somebody who's dealt with as many dysfunctional families as I have. And the thing is, if you want your parents to respect you as men and women instead of kids, the last thing you want to do is go sleep in your old bedroom. Okay? You got to go away from home, prove that you can make it on your own, and then come home, and I don't care if you live in a trash house in town that used to be a meth lab. I don't care, right? Go be an independent person. And the other thing you should, I could go on for hours here, but you've got to add value to the farm. If you want to be, you got to look at the farm not as terms of splitting the pie. You've got to look at the farm as, okay, this $5 million farm is someday we're going to freeze those assets, and my other 4 siblings, I'm going to, have to pay them off, or whatever your parents plan as far as estate planning. But the question you should ask is, okay, how am I going to take a $5 million business and grow it to a $10 million business over 10 years? What am I going to do to add value? And then that should be the focus of your succession planning. And then 15, 20 years from now, you can, as the farm grows and you increase the value of the farm, then you can worry about divvying up the assets. But you've got to personally ask yourself every day, you've got to be driven. There's going to be times when your parents yell at you and you feel very discouraged. That's going to happen to everybody. And because you're farming off on your own, you feel that you're the only one going through it. You've got to show up every day to the farm. And I had a guy that took over a chicken hatchery, and he was getting discouraged and he wasn't showing up to work and blah blah blah. And he got a tattoo, and it said, "Earn respect daily." And it just completely changed his whole attitude. He realized just because he had a bad day yesterday, or if he had an awesome day yesterday, he's got to show up to the barn and do the same performance every day. And if you're going home to the farm, you've got to daily work hard to earn your parents' respect. And so that's how you get treated, not as a child going home to the farm and living in mom and dad's house as in the bedroom. You got to worry about becoming a man that your parents, or a woman that your parents respect. Okay. I guess I didn't talk much about women in agriculture, and I'm glad that there's quite a few girls in here. I had a girl named Dana, and she went home to the farm, and she had 2 brothers, and the one brother went to the same college as she went to, except for he graduated at Christmas because of Labatt's Blue. He drank too much. So anyways, he was a college dropout. And then her other brother went to jail because of drinking and driving too many times. So her 2 brothers were, basically guys that weren't real winners, I guess you'd say. And she had finished top of her class, and when she went home to the dairy, they actually had to buy a new milk tank because she increased milk production that much. She basically kicked her dad out of the parlor, right? And she took over both milking, herd health, and the calves. And the calves went from 30% death rate to, I think it was 3% death rate, because she was doing such an awesome job. And so at Christmas that year, you guys know about capital gains. So at Christmas that year, she came to her dad, and her dad was in the milk house, and she gave him a plan as to, okay, Dad, I think we need to spend money on this. And her dad glanced at it, and he was busy with something put in his pocket. He didn't read it. And then a week later, they only farmed like 700 acres, and they were dairy farmers, so they didn't really they weren't cash croppers. And her dad said, well, there's no money they need a new ventilation system in the heifer barn. And they came home instead with the combine. And to her, it just seemed like a very foolish purchase, and more importantly, she wasn't involved in the decision at all. And her mother said to her, and the true story, she said, your boyfriend has a bigger farm than our farm, and you're probably going to be there next year. So why worry about these issues? Just be nice and let's have a good Christmas. And she says, pardon me. She says, if Matt wants to come work for us, he can, but I'm staying here. And so anyways, she called me up, and I said, the thing is that the parents were trying to be open, but they were also had 5,000 years of chauvinism behind them. And quite often, parents will say that they want to be progressive and treat you as equal with your brothers. But they'll make mistakes, honestly. And the thing is, you got to change is the family dynamics. And what we did was we started sitting down weekly, and Darlene, she came to I should say Dana. Her real name is Darlene. Sorry about this. Anyway, so the thing is, she came to the table each week, and she had her ideas well thought through. And her brothers, came to the table, but they weren't really that good of ideas. And after a year of that, when they went to incorporate, she wasn't even being paid the same as her brothers. And she got equal equity in the businesses as her brothers, and she was CEO. All because we changed the dynamics of decision making. So the key thing is, if you want to be treated as an equal, you got to make sure you have a seat at the table. And the first step to that is actually making sure that these family meetings happen at a set frequency in a set way, instead of Dad informally talking to individuals in the shop and making decisions based on what he thinks. So that's a true story. And any other questions about how women in agriculture? Because I think the thing you'll be actually surprised by how challenging. That's one of the biggest things you'll be surprised by is about 3 years from now, how challenging it is to be treated fairly compared to your brothers. It's a huge problem in agriculture that's not spoken about very often. A lot of families will pretend everything's good, but it's not behind the barn. So you got to change the family dynamics in order for to be able to be successful. Okay.
Did you guys enjoy yourselves? Learn something today? Benefit yourselves someday? Doesn't do you any good though if you just throw the idea in the trash can way out here, so put together. I said, well, you took notes, that's excellent. Do you mind if you took notes?
I'm glad. That's awesome. You guys are a pretty quiet class compared to other guys, right?